From their temporary digs, Kieron and Sean get ready for a trip to Durban. And Smart, their home helper, doesn't believe there is a man on the moon. Soon the brothers must part company as Sean heads for the altar. Chapter 18. Man on the Moon. At our new digs, Smart, our chef-cum-cleaner-cum-everything, who was even untidier than us, didn't mind serving us steak, chips and gem squash soaked in gallons of butter as we sat sunning ourselves on a lounge suite in the garden. I can't remember how many LPs got warped in the heat. Just before the 1969 moon landing, Sean and I took a road trip to Durban. On the eve of our departure, we were sitting on our scruffy sofa having the usual feast when, on the radio, we heard that historic landing had occurred. Though daylight, the moon was visible. We called Smart outside and pointed to the moon. "Look," I said, "a man just landed on the moon." He looked up, shaded his eyes and said, "Bwana, you are mistaken. I cannot see anyone up there." Off he walked, shaking his head and laughing. Sean's Triumph Spitfire was replaced by a Ford Cortina GT. This white bomb had an exhaust system designed to shake the windows when you decelerated. Twin carburetors, a dandy set of gauges across its dash and an 8-track tape player under the dash with 80-watt speakers mounted at the back. If you've never heard of 8-track, it was a music system designed by a bloke called Ralph Miller and borrowed by Bill Lear of Lear Jet fame. Anyway, who really cares? Because our interest was the system's continuous music functionality and ability to switch tracks by the press of a button. By the time we'd done a circuit of the town, everyone knew what Paul Revere and the Raiders sounded like. Let Me, blasting out the windows at full pelt, made sure of that. We were set to go south as fast as possible. Ted gave us a carton of the most disgusting cigarettes money could buy, 10 packs of No 6. We didn't care. We packed up our kit and set off at a fair old clip. It's a 1,500-kilometre trip to Durban from Broken Hill and normally takes at least a couple of days. We had 4 weeks to kill and wanted to hit Durbs, as it was known, as fast as humanly possible. Our first breakdown occurred just outside Pietermaritzburg. As we climbed a hill at about 80 Memph, a monstrous billow of white smoke spewed out from behind. The Cortina came to a renting halt. We sat there in a trance for a while and then got out, and just as we lit up a No 6 cigarette, heard a tractor. Just then, a farmer the size of a tree climbed down the slope staring at the car. We were on a rising slope and needed to get over the brow somehow. Wordlessly, this guy took a chain from his tractor, connected it to the front bumper, tied the chain around his waist, and manually pulled the car over the hill. Below, in the distance, we could see a small town. We got in, waved the fellow goodbye, and coasted down the hill till we reached a garage. "I am terribly sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings," said the head-waggling Indian mechanic. "Your engine is deceased." That was a chunk out of the budget, but 2 days later, our GT had a reconditioned motor and twin black decal stripes from bonnet to trunk to make it go faster. Durban in the 60s was a bustling town. We pulled up outside the Lonsdale Hotel and headed for reception where Helga, a young German receptionist, checked us in. Sean and I vied for position, putting on our best charm. For a few days, it was no go. Then, one evening, I got back from the Bull Ring nightclub adjoining the Lonsdale and pressed the lift button. As I got in, Helga was there carrying a tray of fruit. We exchanged furtive glances, and as we rode up to our respective floors, the lift suddenly stopped. Stuck, we were. So she offered me some fruit as we waited. Finally, we stepped out onto the floor where the swimming pool was, and we bonded somewhat. Well, we were together in her room for the entire 3 weeks of my stay. But all good things must come to an end. A tearful parting ensued, and I thought I would never see her again. But, as they say, there were forces at work. As buggered as a pair of rutting prairie dogs, we returned to Broken Hill with bags under our eyes and bum fluff on our chins. Sean sold the Cortina GT, replaced it with a Land Rover. Being such a gun fanatic, Sean was a member of the gun club and responsible for imported goods. One day, he got a phone call from a customs official at the Chirundu border post. "There is an item here that is subject to quarantine." "What is it?" "You must come, sir. I cannot divulge this information through the telephone." Chirundu was a 4-hour drive, but Sean figured he'd have to make the trip. After all, put someone in a uniform and they're suddenly empowered, like the Phantom. Customs officers were the same the world over. Better, he thought, keep the peace. Sweaty and tired after the long haul, Sean peeled his 6'4" frame out of his Land Rover, entered the customs room, and announced his arrival for the offending item. He watched the official rummage in the store, return with a big cardboard box and plonk it on the counter. Sean read the declaration and had to look the other way for fear of arrest for inappropriate laughter. In large black lettering across the container were the words, "Clay pigeons." The official's guidebook stated that pigeons were expressly forbidden to be imported. Africa. You just have to love it. It was around that time Sean met his future wife. That same year we traveled to South Africa, where I was to be best man at his wedding. It was November of 1969. Sean and I once again stayed at the Lonsdale. The plan was I would hitchhike back home after the wedding. Helga had left for Johannesburg, to another hotel. I got the name of the hotel, of course, just in case. We prepared ourselves for the big event. I had a double-breasted suit, a yellow shirt, red tie, and no shoes. Sean was dressed to kill and looked every part the groom. Rather than parade about in my farm boots, Sean hoiked out a monstrous pair of size 11 shoes that my size 9s swam in. The effect was startling, but I had no money and had to settle for what was available. In the stifling heat of Durban, we headed out to the street and got into Sean's car. We had 15 minutes to get to the church at Pinetown. Sean turned the key. Nothing. Dead. I dashed out and started to push. Sweat bled through my shirt and I heaved and heaved to no avail. After getting help, we finally got started and raced away, getting there late. When I now look at the wedding photos, I see only those shoes looking like a pair of dead cats at my feet. Sean and Angela went off on their honeymoon and I put my thumb out to hitchhike back to Broken Hill. I felt lonely as I waited for a lift. All I could think about was that I'd lost my 2 brothers. I was completely penniless. In desperation, I hitched up to a resort area called Umhlanga Rocks, where Sean was having his honeymoon. He gave me some money and packed me off again, alone. Nothing but a very long road between me and home. I had no plans, couldn't imagine what was going to come next for me. It took most the day to get a decent lift. I'd been dropped off a dozen times, making hardly any progress. It was almost midnight. I was cold and hungry as I sat in a remote roadside storm drain listening for cars, when suddenly a bucky, another name for a pickup truck, stopped and I climbed into the back with the promise of a good 3-hour lift. I slept. When I was woken up, I was shivering. "You need a bed for the night?" the man asked. I said yes, very badly indeed. We turned off the main road, onto a dreadful dirt track. Some time later we arrived at a farm, and by that time I was in a cold sweat. They helped me out and took me to a room and tucked me in. God, it felt good. Some hours later, breakfast arrived, delivered by a rather attractive young girl. Now, when you're not well, you're just not well. It takes time to recover. These people said I could stay as long as I wanted. How about forever, I thought. Anyway, it just turned out that my farming experience was useful. For 5 days, I hung about the place helping to fix fences, rounding up cattle for milking and having campfires at night with the daughter. It seemed I was a welcome guest, so I made sure I satisfied all and sundry. With a full stomach, a knowing smile, a packed lunch, and believe it or not, some money, I was set on the road again. Time to think, time to consider what a useless young man can do with his life. It was another 2 days before I staggered into our house at the army camp in Broken Hill. For a short period, I stayed with Ted and Betty. I sat around listening to music and occasionally wandered to the farm, where I did just enough to get by. Limbo, that's where I was. Smart, the chef, had been bitten by a black mamba and died. My Chevrolet had also died. Sean returned from his honeymoon and moved into a company house. He was now an assayer for the lead and zinc mine. How different things were. After a chance meeting, I met a farmer who needed help on his tobacco farm. There I slogged it out clearing land, burning trees and trying to make a fist of a real job. I even drove the farmer's wife down to Salisbury, now Harare, so she could have her baby. But as often happens, I got restless and ended up back with my parents. I was getting old at 18 and had to take stock of the situation. No girlfriend, no career prospects, and empty pockets. And I missed the woman would become my wife. That was indeed the key.